Chairman Klein, may I ask you to deliver your lecture?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm pleased to be here when Dr. Ronicky had asked me to come to Hungary. It was certainly didn't take me long to accept, and so I look forward to seeing some of your sites today and also at the Budapest site as well. When I agreed to come and speak, I didn't realize that I would be speaking in such a beautiful and historic location. Obviously, this room is a little bit better than the classrooms that I taught in at the University of Texas, and so these are quite honored facilities. So I'm really an honor to be here today. As a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, including the additional protocol, and also a member of both the Nuclear Suppliers Group and Euratom, Hungary certainly can be proud to be considered one of the world's most mature and responsible nuclear nations. Equally impressive from my perspective is the fact that you've cited both a low-level and an intermediate-level repository, something the United States has not done for quite some time. Therefore, I believe that both of our countries can learn from each other, and as Dr. Ronicky indicated, the HAEA and the NRC already have a strong and long-standing relationship, and I believe that this has benefited both our nations. I look forward to strengthening this relationship during my term as chairman of the NRC. As indicated by Dr. Ronicky, he indicated that he would like for me to speak about the nuclear renaissance in the United States and certainly worldwide, and I'll be happy to address that theme. I thought I might give a little bit of background about the Nuclear Regulatory Commission before I answer that specific request. When the United States first developed commercial nuclear power, there was a single organization. It was the Atomic Energy Commission. But in 1974, Congress realized that it would be best to separate the developer and the regulator. And so what happened at that point, they changed the Atomic Energy Commission into what became the Department of Energy and what became the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The Department of Energy is responsible for the promotion, and the NRC is viewed as the independent regulator. And I think having a strong independent regulator has really helped nuclear power to succeed and develop in the United States. Our agency licenses and regulates commercial nuclear plants, but we also license and regulate nuclear fuel cycle facilities. That includes uranium recovery and processing, and also the transport and storage of nuclear waste. We also license other radioactive materials that are used in the fields of medicine, agricultural, and other activities. The fact that the United States has a strong independent regulator, we also have a unique aspect that we look at both the security and the safety of the nuclear power plants. From my perspective, this is good to have a single body that looks at both the safety and the security so that we can balance the needs of both. Let me mention the fact that there are three other issues that I think has made the NRC an effective regulatory agency. First, we've worked very hard to be a timely and efficient regulator. In 1989, our agency began establishing what is called a new combined and operating license procedure. The combined license application, along with design certifications and early site permits, provide the United States with more predictability and effective regulations with no compromise on safety. I also believe that this approach has led to more standardization of plant designs, and it certainly has increased attention to developing passive safety features. In addition to efficiency and timeliness, we also strive to have a high standard of public accountability. We think that transparency is a key to public trust, and I know Dr. Ronicky shares this view, and this is one of the reasons that I believe the HAEA is also a well-respected regulatory agency. We view nuclear regulation to be the public's business, and as such, we believe it should be transacted in a fair, open, and predictable manner. while also handling proprietary information and certainly not releasing all of our safety and security activities. The public needs to be informed about our regulatory processes, and they also need to understand the risks that we are involved in. At the NRC, we've used risk assessment in some form or another so that we don't look at all the risks in the same fashion. What this does mean is that we weigh the safety significance as we look at our regulatory structure. This approach has allowed us to make timely and informed decisions that may not always be popular, but they're defensible. So what that means is when I testify before Congress, I'm able to defend our scientific basis for our decisions, and that we can maintain a reputation for both being objective and independent. There are other factors that I believe has contributed to the good nuclear safety record in the United States, and this is especially by the efforts of the private industry to police itself through the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. This is a private organization created to promote industry excellence and high standards of safety. The Institute of Nuclear Power Operations was really developed after the 3 Mile Island accident in 1979, and then what followed was a World Association of Nuclear Operators that was formed after Chernobyl. I think what this demonstrates is that industry should strive for excellence as well as effective regulatory organizations, and both of these are necessary for public confidence in both the safety and the security of nuclear power. With that background, so now let me turn to what Dr. Ronicky had asked me to address, and that is the nuclear renaissance in the United States. So far, the NRC has received 14 site applications for 23 new reactors. As you're probably aware, that these are the first license application in several decades. These applications present several different designs, and as a regulator, I would have preferred just one boiling water reactor application and one pressurized water reactor application. But as a regulator, we need to evaluate the license applications as they are submitted. So as a regulator, I cannot tell industry what kind of reactors to address or to build. So we have to be flexible and then respond to those applications that we receive. However, I think this aspect that we're going under with our new licensing activities has helped us to standardize our reactors. I oftentimes compare the United States and the French programs in a different way. We have 104 reactors and they're all different. And we typically seem to just have one type of cheese. In France, they have one type of reactor and over 104 different kinds of cheeses. So we sort of have approached our ways a little bit differently. We're also experiencing a lot of interest in uranium mining and in uranium recovery and in fuel processing facilities. We recently received an application from the U.S. Department of Energy for the Yucca Mountain site for the permanent disposal of high-level radioactive waste. This application is large and it is complex. It's over 8,000 pages long. In addition, there's over 1 million pages of backup documents that we will be responsible for examining. Clearly, all of this activity has presented a challenge to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I think that we're probably the busiest that we have ever been. There are a lot of individuals who were concerned that we would have the ability to meet the workload of all of the power plant license applications and the fuel cycle facilities. It hasn't always been easy, but we're meeting the challenge. We're hiring staff, which means our spaces are getting a little cramped. We've had to lease spaces around our complex, but we're meeting our goals. And this is one of the reasons that we've done this, is that several years ago we looked at how we would organize to meet this nuclear renaissance as it would come. We have created an Office of New Reactors, and this office now has over 400 employees that are reviewing these applications. Agency-wide, we typically hired 30 to 50 people a year. But in 2006, we set out the goal to hire a net of 600 additional people. And in addition to hiring the new people, we also have people, for some reason, that want to retire at some point in time. Dr. Ronicky said that one of these days he might actually retire as well. So what we have to do is not only do we have to increase the number of employees to handle the additional workload, we also have to replace those individuals. And what occurred is that about 30 years ago was when the past nuclear renaissance occurred. And so now we're approaching this next activity. And one of our most important things that we can do as a regulator is to transfer that knowledge from those individuals that are retiring to this next generation of workers. So I think for the foreseeable future, our agency has in place both the processes, the staff, and the policies to oversee a safe expansion of the commercial nuclear power in the United States, assuming that our high standards for safety and security are met. I'm aware that Hungary is also looking at adding new nuclear power plants, and my guess is that you may be facing some of the similar retirement challenges that we have in the United States, and also have to hire additional young people to carry out that workload. I think the important thing for us, for regulators, is that Dr. Ronicky can duplicate hopefully what we do well and prevent the mistakes that we've made, and so we will try to pass those along as we continue to communicate with each other. I don't mind admitting that the United States has had its share of challenges and missteps over the years, but we try to share that information with others so that they can learn from it and not repeat those mistakes. I think as a regulator, we have to keep open minds, and we have to learn from those mistakes, and also to share our knowledge and a commitment to safety, because these are the cornerstones of a good regulatory processes. Dr. Ronicky and I have had productive discussions on a variety of issues. This past April, we met in Vienna concerning the Convention for Nuclear Safety, and we'll be seeing each other again next week in Vienna, and where we'll meet with a senior regulators meeting of the IAEA. On the matter of international cooperation, let me note that while the U.S. is willing to play a significant role, it's not always appropriate for large countries to take the lead in offering guidance or making advice to other nations. Often a nation that has a smaller number of nuclear facilities but a strong regulatory infrastructure can actually have greater influence and have more success in encouraging good safety practices and procedures. I'm aware, for instance, that Hungary has a very active participation that exists between Hungary, Slovakia, Slovenia, and the Czech Republic. As I understand it, representatives from these regulatory bodies meet every year for 2 days in Vienna at the General Conference. They share experiences and lessons learned and discuss ways that they can enhance the safety and the security in the region. I also understand that this partnership also played valuable assistance to Armenia as it strives to enhance its nuclear safety. I think these examples of leadership by Hungary and the regional cooperation of the four-way partnership is precisely what is needed for a world nuclear renaissance to proceed in a safe and secure manner. And I would hope that this regional cooperation is held up for models for other countries as well. I know that Dr. Ronicky will have some valuable insights to offer at the IAEA meeting next week, when the International Nuclear Safety Group officially presents its report on nuclear safety infrastructure. This report, which I had the opportunity to review last week, is intended to offer guidance to other nations that are considering adopting nuclear power for the first time. Hungary's participation in the regional partnership is exactly the kind of cooperative efforts that this report had recommended. Let me mention one other point before I conclude. The general public and even regulators sometimes have a tendency to focus too much on power plants and ignore other areas such as fuel processing, waste disposal, or the use of nuclear radioactive isotopes. In light of the announced goals of the terrorists to obtain weapons of mass destruction, it's critical that all nations exercise strict controls over their nuclear facilities and their materials. On behalf of the United States government, I want to thank Hungary for its participation in the Proliferation Security Initiative. One thing we've learned is that good regulatory oversight plays an important role in non-proliferation by promoting nuclear safeguards and secure handling of these nuclear materials. There are many other topics that I could address, but what I find is most helpful in programs like this is to have the dialogue and the questions and answers. And I was told that if you have any very difficult questions, that Dr. Ronicky will handle those, and I get to handle the easy ones. Let me say that I'm grateful for being able to visit Hungary and visit some of your nuclear facilities. Dr. Ronicky and I have developed a good relationship, and I look forward to build on these programs as we expand both our activities. I'm grateful to be invited here in this wonderful building, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much. The basic question is, how do we hire, and are we limited to what we can pay? The answer is we are limited. We are from the government, so therefore we have to meet the government salary requirements. But there are some things that we can do. We can give signing bonuses, and we've had a very successful time recruiting. For example, in 2007, we hired 441 individuals. That was for a net of 219. So we are having about 200 people a year that are retiring, but we are restricted in terms of what we can pay. So what we have to do as a regulator is that since we don't make things, people are our most important activity. So we spend a lot of time to make sure that our employees are trained, that we give positive feedback, and so they will want to stay with us. Because what is likely to happen about 5 years from now, we're going to have individuals that have targets on their chest. They will be trained, and industry will like to have those individuals. So what we do is we have to spend a lot of time training and giving proper feedback so our employees feel that they're making a positive difference and they're recognized. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission was selected in 2006 as the best place to work in the federal government. So that has helped us in recruiting, but we are limited to what we can pay. And the NRC has no stock options like the private companies have. We have, we'll do both. We have a training program internally that's really more directed at meeting our regulatory requirements. If we hire a brand new person right out of college, it typically takes us 1 to 2 years to get them to think like a regulator. In other words, they follow procedures, they know what our requirements are, and so it takes us a while to train those individuals. If we hire someone from industry that has had a lot of experience, it still will take us about a year to train that individual to understand our regulatory requirements. But most of our training is done internally. We have a training staff, but we will also, where appropriate, send people back, for example, and let them get an advanced degree, where we will pay for that advanced degree, a master's degree, but then we expect them to work for us for a number of years. So we do both training internally and external, but more internal. That's a good question in terms of which is better, a Mercedes or a BMW, and in terms of some of that is subjective. But in the United States, we typically have two kinds of electric markets: those that have been deregulated, as you indicated, and are market-based, and then those that are still regulated primarily by the states, and where the utilities will have to justify the rates that they charge compared to the others that are more of a free market. And we have a mixture of those. And so for us, for the NRC, we have had applications for what we call the merchant plants that are deregulated and still those that are regulated. The quality of the applications from those, really, you're unable to tell which one is better. They're both good, and they will both have to meet our requirements. I think as the plants are built in the short term, those states that still have a regulated structure are more likely to build earlier than those that are in the market-based. And part of that has to do with the loan guarantees and how they do financing. Because if they're still regulated, they can get a guaranteed rate of recovery.
So I would like to ask you about some educational questions. First of all, what is your plan in the US to meet the future use of training reactors at the university campuses. So I know that you have several reactors at the universities, and they have some programs with the operations. What is your plan?
I should note that the last university reactor, the newest university reactor, was one which I built when I was a faculty member. At that point, I was a licensee as opposed to where I stand now. And that experience has helped me better understand what it's like to be a licensee as compared to a regulator. So we have about 30 research reactors at universities that are still in operation, and their size will vary. The largest is a 10 megawatt thermal reactor at the University of Missouri that has a very dynamic use. They make a lot of radioisotopes that are used in the medical profession, and so that's almost a much different kind of a teaching reactor than what we had at the University of Texas at Austin, which was a 1 megawatt trigger reactor, which is about as inherently safe as you can get because of the way the fuel is constructed. They're self-regulating. So I believe that it's very important for us to have in the United States a mixture of academic programs, some of which the students can get actually hands-on experience running a reactor. They get licensed by the NRC to operate the reactor, and so it's a very good teaching tool. In general, we have not had any major problems with university research reactors. Again, those are typically low power and are used for teaching as opposed to the commercial, very large thermal outputs that are used for power. But I think they form a fundamental basis for our educational program.
Thank you very much. And the other question is, how can you attract the best students for the nuclear industry? Because I think there are big competition, for example, coming from the informatics. So how can you really attract the best students?
We work at it. So the way you attract the best students is that you have to identify them, and you have to basically sell yourself, like us as the NRC, why they should come work for us. So what we try to do is we tell them the excitement they can be involved in. We are a technical regulator, so we need a lot of people with very good technical skills. But what we do is we have a massive recruiting effort. We have people whose full-time job is to recruit new employees. And so what we do is when we identify those best students, we'll tell them basically the opportunities they have to succeed and to contribute to the nation working for the federal government. And again, what we've found is that money is not always the driver. I usually say it may not be number one, but it's ahead of whatever's in number two. So salaries are important, but they're not the most important. I think what people typically want to do, they want to feel that they're valued, that they are making a positive contribution, and that we need to give them feedback as to how they're doing. So I think for us as a government agency is that we just need to articulate how they contribute and make the world a safer place and the value they're adding. So part of it is marketing, a part of it is training, and then part of it is just normal feedback that you give any employee to make sure that they feel that they're adding value on a day-to-day basis.
The behavior concerning reprocessing and closure of the fuel cycle?
That's a very good question, and I will give you a two-part answer. One with my academic hat on first. Since I still have tenure at the University of Texas, I still feel like my home is at the university. So as a faculty member and someone looking at a technical perspective, it makes sense to recycle, to reprocess. What I tell people, we used to throw away aluminum cans and glass. We don't do that anymore. So we recycle it. And you look at the spent nuclear fuel, a lot of similarities. There are technical reasons why we should recycle. But there's typically, I think the challenge we have in the United States, there's no single discriminator that says why we should recycle. Some people will try to argue it on volume reduction. We have a lot of space in the United States that is sparsely populated, so space is not always a good rationale. Economics, right now it costs more to recycle and reprocess than it does to buy uranium on the open market and basically make fresh fuel that has not been recycled. But at some point in time, that big uranium mine might be the spent fuel pools of commercial reactors because of the value of the energy that's still there. But right now, I think there's no single discriminator. But if you look systematically, there's reasons why we should recycle. As you probably know, that was really recycling in the United States was stopped during President Carter, and he was able to do that by an executive order. So with the stroke of the pen, he was able to basically stop the recycling process, and Congress didn't have to vote on it. Later, that was overturned by President Reagan, but by that time, no company was going to invest the millions of dollars for a recycling facility, realizing that by the stroke of the pen it could be stopped. So as a regulator, I can't promote for or against recycling. What we do as a regulator is we look at what industry and other parts of the government may want to do. But I think at some time we will recycle in the United States, but it may be a long time. We don't have to really make that decision today. Dry cask storage is safe. We regulate that. So it's not a safety issue, it's more of a policy issue. But the Department of Energy this last several years has been on a program called the Global Nuclear Energy Partnership, where they're looking worldwide at what should the world look at for its total fuel availability, and is there a better way to do it? So the answer is, I think at some point the United States will recycle, may or may not be in my lifetime.
Is there any hydrogen producing atomic reactor now in the States under regulatory process?
Yeah, the question is for the hydrogen production. There is currently no nuclear reactor that is producing hydrogen. The one that is being proposed is the high temperature gas cooled reactor, where the outlet temperature is at a higher degree, and so you can form hydrogen production with a catalytic process. That is being planned. It's called NGNP, the Next Generation Nuclear Project. And the Department of Energy in the 2005 Energy Act created that reactor. It was expected to be in the state of Idaho, was where it was physically expected to be located. The Department of Energy has not yet decided exactly whether it will be a prismatic or a pebble bed gas reactor. But what is clear, the non-light water reactor that we're looking at in the United States is expecting to see a gas reactor, and hydrogen production is one of the activities that they're considering.
My question would be that how large is the safety exclusion zone around the nuclear power plants in the United States? Has it a standard size or individually variable depending on the power of the stations? And what is excluded for utilization of this area? Or what is allowed? That may be also a shorter question.
What we have in the United States is, and probably that's not different than a lot of other countries, oftentimes the nuclear plants were located in remote areas where the population density was not high, and a lot of that was a historical activity. They wanted, in the unlikely event there was an accident, it would be better to have that reactor somewhere rather than in the middle of a city like Budapest or Washington, D.C., for example. So the intent was to have these facilities in more remote locations. What has oftentimes happened over time is that people have moved around the nuclear plants, and so they were originally located in remote areas. They're now no longer as remote. And so what we do is we have usually our emergency planning includes a 10-mile radius around the plant, what we call a 10-mile zone. So we have emergency procedures and plans on what-if scenarios. You know, what if there is a radiation release? How do you evacuate the people? How do you monitor the wind speed? How do you look at potential contamination? And so we have a very active emergency planning program for every reactor. And everyone is different because the population is different, the terrain is different. And so we expect the utilities to tell us how they're going to operate the plant, and then what would they do in the unlikely event that there is a potential release. And that program is exercised. And so we go through a series of exercises where we'll do a mock evacuation plan where people have to move. So each one is different, but we don't restrict necessarily people living close to nuclear power plants. And if they want to live close to them, typically the utility owner will have several thousand acres of land at a site that they have fenced for security. And as you get closer to the reactor itself, the security requirements get increased so that you can prevent anyone coming in and damaging the facility. But typically, every reactor will have an emergency plan, and those plans have actually been exercised more for non-radioactive cases. For example, tornadoes, hurricanes. They will actually use the infrastructure that's in place for other activities. So they've been beneficial to develop those emergency exercise plans, but they've never had to be used for an actual release. But we typically have what we call our emergency zone, and then we also require the utilities to have their own security system where they have armed guards, a lot of physical barricades and things of that nature. As you know, the containment building around these reactors are very robust, and they were designed to contain all the radioactive energy that if you had what's called a double pipe break, to contain that radiation. So the facilities are very robust. And then we have security and emergency planning zones at each site.
Thank you very much. It is clear, but still one number. What is the area? How many miles where no settlements, no houses are available?
There is no exclusion zone. It would be limited to the physical boundary of the property that a utility owns. And so typically we have no exclusion zone except the owner-controlled area. And again, that size will vary from plant to plant. It may be several hundred acres or several thousand acres that a company will own. But if someone wants to build right next to the owner's fence, they can do so.
Director, I would like to ask you about the public acceptance. Can public acceptance stop building the reactors or not?
You know, public acceptance is very important, and the answer is, can they stop a project? With our current licensing structure, we do our decisions on technical grounds, and as you probably know, that people react emotionally rather than technical sometimes, and so they can make it challenging. But we typically make our decisions on scientific fact and risk-based. I think it will be difficult for the public to stop a plant from being built. They can certainly put it into courts that will cause a long delay, and that sometimes will cause the utility to choose another source of energy. In other words, if it's delayed and they can't meet their timelines. But what we're finding now is that two things have happened. One is that there's a greater public acceptance of nuclear, and I think part of the reason is there's more concern about global warming now than there was in the past. And so previously we have a lot of coal in the United States, and so if a utility looked at needing to meet a demand, and they look at the challenging licensing that they would have to go through for us versus what they would have to do to build a coal-fired plant. For base load generation, they would probably have gone with coal. A lot of utilities were building natural gas plants for base load. So they can choose, the utilities can choose how they want to generate electricity, with natural gas, with coal, with nuclear. And I think a few years ago they would not have chosen nuclear because it took a long time for us to make a licensing decision. What we're finding now is that at the most of those plants, applications that we've received are at existing sites. And so, for example, they might have designed this site to handle 4 reactors, but they only built 2. So they have the land, the infrastructure for additional 2. So most of the applications we're receiving are what we call brownfield sites. They're at sites that existing reactors already have been operated for decades. In those areas, the public acceptance is very high. And so most of the opposition that we've seen as we've held licensing hearings at some of these sites, most of the opposition are being brought in from other regions. The local support is quite high. It's typically out of Washington, D.C. There will be anti-nuclear groups that will come in to those locations. So I think the way our process is designed to handle is a lot different licensing now than it was in the 70s and 80s, where now we have a one-step licensing process. A utility can come in and it can do an environmental assessment and get an early site permit. And then the intent is they can go to the shelf and they can pick what reactor types that we have pre-certified so that they don't have to do a licensing from zero. They can use a lot of information. It's sort of like the way the airplane industry operates. You don't get a license for each airplane. You certify like a 767 or a 737 or an Airbus. But if an airline wants to use those, they don't have to basically certify each airplane. They get one that's already certified. We're going to do something similar for the reactors. We will pre-certify those designs, and then all you really will be needing to address is the environmental impacts at that site. So we're hoping the licensing will be more streamlined, more predictable, but no compromise on safety and security. And so we have a division within NRC that just looks at the existing 104 reactor fleet. Then we have this Office of New Reactors that are handling the applications that are coming in. But all of our regulations, for example, that apply for the 104 that operate today will also apply for the new reactors. The new reactors are more passively safe, and so what they've done is a lot more design innovations where they'll take advantage of natural convection and natural cooling, cooling to remove the heat. So the risks for these new passive reactors are less because of the way they're designed. But all the reactors, the new ones and the existing, still have to meet all of our activities. So what we look at on risk-informed regulations, we try to look at what are the issues that have the most serious impact. And that's where we spend most of our time on working with the utilities and giving clear expectations so that those activities that are higher risk get more attention. Those issues that are lower risk that get less attention. And let me give you an example that crosses from the technical side to the political side. We have one reactor in the state of Vermont called Vermont Yankee, and they have had a lot of difficulty with their cooling tower. And this is a device that removes the heat, so when the water goes back into the river, it's not as hot as if it just went through from the reactor plant itself. So they have a cooling tower, and it basically limits the thermal discharge into the river. That reactor, or that cooling tower, is not a safety system except one cell that we make sure it will operate under all kinds of conditions. So it's more robust, tighter requirements, and so we expect maybe 1/10 of that cooling tower. The other part of the cooling tower is not safety related, because basically if they lose that cooling tower, what it means is they have to shut down. The safety cell is enough to keep that reactor cool to remove the decay heat. So you've got this very long cooling tower, but only a very small part of it is safety related. And the maintenance that had been provided for that cooling tower was not the best. And so a section collapsed. Not safety related, because it did not impact the safety. The safety cell was very robust. It didn't have a problem. So all that means from us as a regulator is that if that utility loses that part of the cooling tower that's not safety related, they just simply have to shut it down. The safety cell will do the heat decay, so it is not a safety situation. We don't expect that 90% of that cooling tower, because it's not safety related. We don't need to have our inspectors go out, look at it every day to day. But the public, when they see this cooling tower that collapsed, you know, what happens in the back of their mind, well, if you can't maintain a cooling tower, how can you make sure that you're running this reactor safely? So there's a disconnect between perception and safety. So what we try to do for risk informed is we want to spend our time, our inspectors that are at the reactors every day, that they look at issues that are safety related, and they don't worry about things that are non-safety related. But things like that cause public issues and public confidence. But what we try to look at is things that are important we spend time on, things that are not important we don't spend as much time. And that's what the risk informed is helps us look at where do we need to spend our time to make sure we're protecting the public and the environment. And we do that analytically. You know, we have calculations that will tell us frequencies of accidents. So typically we look at 1 in a million. You know, that's sort of our benchmark on our probability risk assessment. If it's like 10 to the minus 7th, we tend not to look at it. But if it's 1 in a million, then we'll put more time. And in other areas, like the unlikely event of a double pipe break where the pipe moves in 2 different directions, if that occurs, we know how to handle it.
Ilyen mértékben. Várom erre a kérdésre válaszát, és még egy kérdésem lesz.
The answer is we do have elected officials that do take anti-nuclear stands. What I tell everyone is that the NRC has 535 advisors. 100 of those are from the Senate, 435 are the U.S. House of Representatives. And so you will have some of those individuals who are anti-nuclear. I think the important thing for any leader to do is that they shouldn't be just against something, they should be for something. And so if you need more power, for example, there's no perfect source of electrical generation. If there was the perfect source, we wouldn't be having all these discussions. So it's very important, I think, for elected leaders to provide reasonable alternatives. If they don't like one source, then they should provide another source. But we do have elected officials that typically will take anti-nuclear stands, but not that many. I think President Bush is the first president since President Eisenhower that has mentioned the need for nuclear power in his State of the Union message. And I think that has helped open the debate and the discussion in the United States about electrical generation. All forms have some negatives, but the reason that those plants are built is they provide something that we want, namely lights and for us, air conditioning in Texas. So, but we have not had a president that has taken a very strong anti-nuclear stand. Typically, they're more silent.
Nem tartok politikai kérdésnek, hanem mondjuk egy hatóságnak a feladatának. De nálunk úgy látszik, fordítva ültek fel erre a lóra. Várom erről a felvetéséről az értékelését.
I'm sure that anytime there is an event of any kind, politicians might use that for their advantage, both in Hungary and the United States. But as a regulator, Dr. Ronig and I want to make sure that the public is protected. And I think in the case of the event in Hungary, that there was no one that was injured. The public was protected. There's usually various levels of defense so that the public were not harmed in any way. And I think one of the challenges that we have in the nuclear field is radiation is something we can't see, smell, taste, and so our fears sometimes take over, and that makes it an easy target for elected officials that want to get up and say they're protecting the citizens, because no one is going to get up and say I'm not protecting the citizens. So in the case of advisory committees, we have those all the time in the United States. In general, these are formed for issues that are high profile, you know, that has a lot of media interest. There will be a commission created that will include technical experts and non-technical experts to do an evaluation, you know, to find out what happened. There was a refinery explosion in Houston, for example, that several people were killed, so there was a commission formed to look at what caused it, what should have been done. So I think we will always see individuals who will sometimes take events to their political advantage. I think our job as regulators, Dr. Ronig and I basically want to explain to the public what systems are in place to give them confidence that there is a safety system, that utilities have to operate plants safely, and there are penalties if they don't operate them safely. In the case of the United States, we can fine utilities for improper actions, and we do that quite often. So I think the public needs to understand that there is a system in place. Most people don't really know where electricity comes from in the United States. If you talk to a lot of people, where do they get the electricity? They will say, well, I get it from the light switch. You know, when I turn it on, it's there. So I think what we need to do in the academic community and in the government and private industry, we need to educate the public on what the choices are. For us in the United States, when they flip the switch and the electricity doesn't come on, they don't question whether the utility is operating that day. So that people have come to an expectation that no matter when they turn the light switch on, they want it to be there and every day, and they want it to be cheap as well. So I think what we can do in the academic world, the government and industry, is we really need to educate the public more about where does electricity come from and what are the choices. And that's where I think the people who are opposed to something should give legitimate alternatives. So rather than being just against something, they should say what they're for. But we do have commissions that are formed in the United States. But in general, those commissions try to look to see, do they need to make changes in the regulations so it can be done safer? It should be a net positive impact rather than just help someone get elected. For us, for a regulator, it helps us to have standardized plants, so we don't have to have regulations for each one that's different. So I'm a very strong advocate for standardization. As a regulator, I would have liked to have seen just one pressurized water reactor and one boiling water reactor. But what is going to happen over the next probably 2 decades, you will only have about 4 to 5 vendors that will be selling reactors worldwide. So this will be like Westinghouse AP1000, the Areva EPR, the General Electric boiling and water reactor, and a few others. And so the vendors that are in the market today are global companies, and so they want to sell worldwide. So I think it's very important for the regulators to harmonize our requirements so that you don't have one country that says, well, my reactor is safer than your reactor, that they all meet some minimum standards, and then we can have a dialogue so that we don't reinvent the wheel all the time. I don't think that that will inhibit innovation, but in terms of the companies that are out there for these big reactors, you're only going to have about 4 to 5 vendors to choose from in the world, and it's best if those are standardized so that all countries have the same economic opportunities and the same safety standards from those. So as a regulator, I cannot make a utility submit a standardized application, a standardized plant. But what I tell the industry, that if they come in and they want to build a reactor that we have not certified, it may take us a long time to look at that application. So you can sort of send signals of why standardization is good. And the industry now realizes that. They also want to have standardization so that if there's an event at one plant, they will know how to respond to every plant. So I think standardization is helpful to the world, frankly.
Yes, thank you very much. My other question concerns about the generation 4 or more advanced reactors. Actually, I have the impression that the United States is not leading this project worldwide. Most of the developments are going on in different places. Do you think that the United States is going to take over this development work and revive the pioneering the introduction of new types of reactors?
The Generation 4 reactors are something that's very important, and these will be, a gas reactor is one of those. Liquid metal fashion reactors are others. What is likely to occur, if you look worldwide, most reactors are light water reactor, where you simply heat up water and boil it, turn it to steam, and then put it through a turbine. So most of the big reactors that are available today are light water reactors. Where I think your point is really good is for developing countries. Their grid may not handle a 1,000 megawatt reactor, and so they will be looking at smaller reactors and maybe a different type. Generation 4 could be one of those, but for the industry, for supplying electricity, most utilities want a reactor that is well known, well understood, and they know how to operate them. And those in the world today are light water reactors. So that's going to be the backbone, I think, of the commercial industry for several decades to come. I think what is a challenge for us as a regulator is that 90% of our budget is paid by those we regulate. So the licensees are the ones that pays for our budget. We have to go through the congressional appropriation like everyone else, but then 90% will come back to the Treasury by the fees that we, the bills that we give the utilities. So if no utility wants to build a Generation 4 reactor, then we don't have a mechanism to look at it, unless Congress appropriates us specific money to look at it. So there is a disconnect, I think, from what we do as a regulator to what some other countries may want for either a Gen 4 or at least a smaller reactor that is what is called grid appropriate, the size of a nuclear reactor that would be appropriate to their grid. That is a disconnect for us as an agency, because if someone wants to come in with a new small reactor, and we're getting a lot of those requests, and we typically will have 1 to 2 meetings with a company that wants to build a reactor, but if we start to look at the detailed certification, then we need someone that will be paying the time and labor that it takes to review those. And so we're getting a lot of interest in small reactors for which there's no market in the United States at the moment. If a utility wants to build a reactor, it's going to be a large existing light water reactor. And so that's, of the application we have today, these are all standardized big light water reactors. But the world does need a smaller reactor, and I don't know how that's going to happen. South Africa is building a gas reactor, a pebble bed gas reactor. China has a small one. Japan has a small one. So I think we'll see the gas reactors develop slowly. And the reason that I think we'll see that is for process heat. Some of the chemical companies like Dow, they use 60% of their feedstock just to make steam. And so that's not necessarily an efficient way to for a chemical company to operate. So they would like an alternative source, and a gas reactor may be that in the future. But I don't, at the moment, unless Department of Energy takes the lead in promoting the Gen 4, that will be the group that is responsible for it in the United States, not us as a regulator. But I think your assessment is good, that there needs to be more international cooperation on this next set of Generation 4 reactors. But that will have to be funded by another mechanism.
My name is Paul Teteni from the Institute of Isotopes, Budapest. The first question which I would raise is relates to the recyclization. As far as I know, there was a common project, a Russian United States project, about converting the nuclear warheads into mixed oxide, mixed oxide sources. Does this project now operate? As far as I know, the final date, the finishing of full transmission was 2018. What is the situation with that? My second question relates to final disposal of high-level nuclear waste. The final disposal, I mean. What is the situation with that in the United States?
Those are two good questions. One of your first question about the warheads. In a warhead, you typically will have two components. You'll have high enriched uranium and plutonium. Half of the electricity that's generated in the United States now comes from dismantled Russian weapons material, high enriched uranium. So that has been blended down into roughly 5% enrichment for commercial fuel. If you have a nuclear weapon, you need typically in excess of 90% high enriched uranium. So half of our electricity comes from that blended down Russian weapons material. high-enriched uranium. And so that one is proceeding along quite well. And the other one that is not proceeding along as well is the one that you described, and that's what do you do with the plutonium? And that's where it was to be made into mixed oxide fuel. When this program started in the mid-90s, Russia wanted to use their plutonium to put in breeder reactors to make more fuel for more reactors. So typically a 1,000-watt breeder reactor will provide enough fuel to handle 3 1,000-megawatt commercial reactors. So they wanted to use their plutonium to make other fuel for their reactors. So there was an agreement between the U.S. and Russia, because what Russia wanted to initially do is they wanted to use theirs fast reactors. What most of the policy individuals during President Clinton wanted to do was just bury it. So you had the U.S. burying Russia fast reactors, two ends of the spectrum. So the compromise was mixed oxide, so that you would make mixed oxide of the weapons plutonium into existing light water reactors. There was an agreement for 34 metric tons of plutonium from both countries that would put it in mixed oxide fuel. That plant for the United States is being built now in South Carolina, and we license that plant. The Department of Energy is the one that's responsible for it, but we will license, and so we're going through the construction and licensing of that facility to make mixed oxide fuel out of 34 metric tons of U.S. plutonium. It's not clear what Russia will do. I think they will probably do what they've always wanted to do, and they will put it in fast reactors. Even though there was an agreement from both sides to do that, Russia only would do that if the United States paid for that plant, and it's about $4 billion. So there's a discussion about who pays, who builds it. So you can have an agreement, but if there's no additional money coming forward, it may not materialize. So it's not clear what will happen with the 34 metric tons of plutonium in Russia. But in the United States, we will proceed and put that in the light water reactors, mixed oxide fuel. On the other question, I think how we proceed and how we end up adding more nuclear power units and what there are is going to be depending on each country, what their needs are. But I think the good news about the mixed oxide, we are using, the swords and the plowshares, for that program. And then did you have another question? The final disposition. On the every country that has commercial nuclear power at some point will need a final disposition path of something. And what all countries have agreed upon is that it will be a stable geological formation that has been stable for millions of years and it is likely to be stable for a few thousand years in the future. The challenge becomes, where is that site located? That's the application we received in June of this year from the Department of Energy. And so our site, the only license application we have for high-level disposal is the Yucca Mountain application, and that's the small application that only has 8,000 pages and another 1 million pages of documents supporting it. That one has been very political. Originally, the United States was looking at 3 sites at 3 different formations. One was basalt in the state of Washington, a volcanic rock. Another one was salt in the state of Texas. And then the third was tuff, a volcanic ash that's compressed into rock. And that was for the Yucca Mountain site. And the Yucca Mountain site is next to the Nevada test site where the military and the Department of Energy used to detonate a lot of weapons. And so that site will never be a greenfield site. It will never be cleaned up. It's not going to happen. So the Yucca Mountain site is near the Nevada test site, and it's remote, dry. There are a lot of technical characteristics, but it's a political one. It's sort of like garbage. Everyone wants it picked up, but no one wants to put down, particularly if it's near them. So picking that ultimate site is a challenge. So for us, the NRC now is reviewing that application, and we will determine whether it meets the technical requirements. It will take us 3 to 4 years, if we get the funding, to do that technical evaluation. So Congress has said they would like us to make a decision within 3 years. We can have 1 additional year if we need it. but currently they haven't given us the funds we need to make that decision within that 3 to 4 years. I think the countries that are furthest along on a permanent disposition site are Sweden and Finland. Both of those countries are likely to have a site in operation within a few years. Sweden probably a little bit ahead of Finland at the moment. But all countries that have nuclear power, the ultimate disposition site is a stable geological formation. It will vary from salt, clay, and granite, but those are the types of formation. And for us, we're looking at a volcanic ash stable formation. That, again, is a challenge. For the United States, you have sort of 3 camps. One camp that doesn't like nuclear power and wants to shut everything down. So if they prevent a solution to the high-level waste, it will make it difficult to build other plants. You have another group of people who believe that we should not do a once-through disposal, so that they would like to see recycling done so that you get that energy back out of the fuel. And then the other group is advocating just once-through spent fuel disposal. And so now, as they say, the ball is in our court. The NRC will now evaluate that application to see if it meets the technical requirements. I know France is looking at a site. I talked to Dr. Ronicky, and I think you're looking at some sites ultimately in Hungary. But what's interesting, again, we have a big disconnect between real risks and perceived risk. And it's going to take all of us to help educate the public so they get confidence that it can be done safely.
I think this last 2 sentences was a good finish for this morning presentation. Thank you very much, Chairman Klein, not only for your lecture, but patiently answering the questions through more than 1 hour. Thank you very much. So take the opportunity and be our guest. Thank you again, Chairman Klein.
Thank you.